Welcome to a place where love is not polished, not dressed in fairy tales, but told raw, unfiltered, and true. Here, stories breathe the ache of silence and the fire of awakening. The eyes that linger too long, the touch that changes everything, the night that shatters loneliness, these are not just moments. They are confessions of the soul. Every story shared here is a heartbeat, a whisper of desire, a reminder that even after years of emptiness, love still finds a way to rise. This is where passion and tenderness blur, where forbidden closeness becomes unforgettable truth, and where loneliness finally breaks under the weight of love's fire. If you've ever longed, if you've ever ached, if you've ever felt the dangerous pull of desire, you've found the channel where your story leaves too. That night, there was something different, something I hadn't expected and certainly wasn't prepared for. It wasn't in the words spoken, because there were hardly any. It wasn't in the air, though the silence between us felt heavy, charged with something I couldn't name. It was in his eyes, the way they lingered longer than they ever had before. The way they seemed to cut through the years, peeling away the layers I had built around myself. Eyes that had once looked at me with casual familiarity now searched deeper, like they were seeing parts of me that even I had forgotten. It wasn't a glance of politeness or a look of recognition. It was something slower, heavier. His gaze didn't dart away. It stayed. It stayed long enough to make me shift in my seat, long enough for heat to spread in my chest and then lower, long enough to make me feel that something inside me was suddenly alive. I had spent so many years moving through life unnoticed, almost invisible. But in that moment I felt seen, not just seen, but understood, as if every ache, every secret longing, every piece of loneliness was being pulled from me just by the way he looked at me. I tried to laugh it off, to remind myself who he was and what he meant in the long line of years behind me. But something inside refused to dismiss it. His eyes had shifted from innocence to knowing. That was the truth, and the way they stayed on me carried a weight I couldn't shake. It was almost frightening, because it wasn't supposed to happen. He wasn't supposed to look at me like that, and I wasn't supposed to feel the way I was starting to feel. I thought I could brush it aside, but the more I avoided those eyes, the more I felt them. Even when I wasn't looking directly at him, I could sense them pulling at me. Like gravity, like a hand reaching across the silence, without touch, without words, yet more powerful than anything spoken aloud. Every time our eyes met, the room seemed to blur away. Every sound softened. Every distraction dissolved. It was as if the world was holding its breath, leaving only that charged line between us. And in that line, I felt the truth of myself reflected back. All the years of being strong, of hiding the hollowness that crept in during the quiet nights. All the times I had told myself that part of life was over, that certain doors had closed for good. His eyes unlocked them, swinging them wide open again. I could feel my own defenses shattering, and I didn't even try to stop it. It wasn't lust in the shallow sense, though desire lived there too, undeniable and sharp. It was something deeper. It was recognition. As though he had finally grown into a man who could see me not as someone older, not as someone untouchable, but as a soul with hunger, with need, with tenderness waiting to be touched. I had almost forgotten what it felt like to be wanted that way, to be regarded with that mixture of admiration and fire. That gaze wasn't careless, it was deliberate. It was filled with an honesty that frightened me more than any lie ever could. I caught myself staring back longer than I should have, testing it, questioning if it was real, and the more I looked, the more I saw it, that undeniable truth in his expression. He wasn't looking at me as if I were fragile. He wasn't looking at me as if I were someone past the edge of being desired. He was looking at me like I was the answer to something he had been searching for. That realization made my breath falter. My pulse quickened in a way that reminded me of a much younger version of myself, one who still believed in moments that could change everything. The more I let it sink in, the more I realized how long I had been starving for that kind of connection, the quiet hunger that I had buried beneath years of pretending not to need anyone, pretending that fulfillment could be found in small routines, in memories, in distractions. But his eyes cracked it all open. They whispered to me without sound, "You are not invisible. You are not done. You are still alive." And once that whisper touched me, there was no going back. My body responded before my mind could make sense of it. A shiver ran through me, though the room was warm. My lips parted, though I had no words to say. Every heartbeat felt heavier, louder, as if echoing against the silence that had grown between us. I felt the undeniable pull, and I knew he felt it too. The way his breath shifted, the way he didn't look away even when I wanted him to, even when I broke and looked down, only to be pulled back to him again. It was more than attraction. It was awakening. The kind that happens so suddenly, so unexpectedly, that it terrifies and consumes all at once. Because once you're awakened, you can never return to sleep again. That night, everything changed with nothing more than the silent shift of his eyes. It started so quietly, so harmlessly, the kind of closeness that could be explained away with circumstance, with coincidence. Sitting too near on the couch because there wasn't enough space, passing a glass of water, brushing past in a narrow hallway. It should have meant nothing, and yet it did. It meant everything because in those small accidents, something deeper was stirring, something neither of us wanted to admit at first. The first time his hand brushed mine, it was unintentional. A flicker of contact that should have been forgotten in an instant, but I didn't forget. The heat of it lingered long after he pulled away, sparking a rush inside me that I tried to smother. I told myself it was only skin against skin, nothing more. But the truth was harder to silence. It had awakened something I thought was buried forever. The second time wasn't an accident. His hand hovered a moment longer when he passed me the glass, his fingers grazing mine with just enough pressure to leave no doubt. I felt it shoot through me, sharp and undeniable, and I met his eyes without meaning to. There was no apology in them, no excuse, just that same steady fire that had unsettled me before, and in that fire, I knew we were standing on the edge of something dangerous. Every accidental touch after that carried weight. A hand at the small of my back when moving past me, warm and steady. The brush of his arm against mine as we sat too close, shoulders pressing, neither pulling away. It was as if the air itself was conspiring against us, creating chances for our bodies to remember what our minds tried to forget. Every contact left me trembling inside, caught between fear and longing. What terrified me most was not just the physical closeness, but the way my heart betrayed me. Each touch made me ache in places I hadn't felt in years, stirring a hunger I thought time had erased. It wasn't just desire, it was a breaking open, a flood that refused to be contained. I would lie awake at night replaying those moments, the heat of his palm, the steadiness of his presence, and the way it made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in so long. It was forbidden, yes, but it was also magnetic. The harder I tried to resist, the stronger the pull became. I found myself searching for him in the room, my body instinctively leaning toward his presence, craving the simple nearness of him. When his hand brushed against mine, I didn't move away. When his breath came close to my ear, as he leaned in to say something, I shivered and didn't hide it. It was as though my body had made the choice before my mind had even dared to form the thought. There was fear in it, a trembling awareness that what was happening couldn't be explained, couldn't be justified. And yet, underneath the fear was a longing that only grew deeper with every moment. A longing not just to be touched, but to be consumed, to be undone by the very thing I had been denying myself for years. I kept asking myself why it felt so impossible to stop, why I couldn't simply pull away, close the door, protect myself from the chaos that was building. But the answer was clear every time our eyes locked, every time his hand found mine in ways that were both subtle and deliberate. The truth was that I didn't want to stop. I didn't want to push it away. Because in that forbidden pull, I felt something I hadn't felt in what felt like a lifetime. I felt wanted, desired, alive. The moments grew bolder, stretching longer. His hand would linger at the curve of my waist, his thumb tracing the fabric as if memorizing it. My breath would catch, and I would pretend not to notice, but my body betrayed me in the way I leaned closer, in the way my lips parted without words. It was dangerous, this silent conversation between touches, and yet it was more honest than anything either of us could have spoken aloud. There was a night when his fingers brushed against mine under the table, slow and deliberate, and instead of pulling away, I let them stay. That quiet choice was a confession in itself. My pulse thundered in my ears, but I didn't move. I couldn't. That moment stretched into eternity, a fragile balance between restraint and surrender. And in that fragile space, I realized that the pull between us had already crossed the line. There was no going back to what it had been before. The more it happened, the less it felt accidental. The touches became a language, one that spoke of longing, of hunger, of a connection that neither of us could name out loud. And with every brush of his hand, every accidental touch, I was falling deeper into the truth of it. A truth that terrified me as much as it consumed me, because what began as innocent closeness had transformed into something unstoppable, something that felt like fire beneath the skin, burning hotter with each passing moment. And in that fire, I could no longer deny what was pulling me toward him with every breath I took. The night his hand stayed on mine without moving away, I knew the line was gone forever. Loneliness is not always loud. Sometimes it is the quietest thing in the world, creeping in so slowly that it becomes part of the air, part of the skin, part of the bones. For years I carried it like a second shadow. The days were filled with routines, with conversations that skimmed the surface, with smiles that never reached the heart. Nights were heavier, though, when silence pressed in from all sides and the emptiness felt endless. I convinced myself that this was what life had become, that some doors once closed were never meant to open again. I told myself I was strong enough to live without needing more, and then it happened. Not with grand declarations or fireworks, but in the simplest, quietest moment of closeness. A breath too near, a hand resting where no hand had rested in years, a warmth that spread through me before I could even name it. It was small, but it was everything, because in that instant, the weight of loneliness I had carried for so long cracked open. The silence that had lived inside me broke apart, and in its place came trembling, fire, life. I hadn't realized how starved I was until that moment, how much of myself had gone numb. The human heart can only live in isolation for so long before it begins to forget what it feels like to be touched, to be seen, to be wanted. And yet the body remembers even when the mind insists it has moved on. All it took was that single moment, that single closeness, and suddenly the years of emptiness collapsed like a fragile wall. His nearness was almost unbearable, not because it hurt, but because it awakened every part of me that I had buried. I felt my chest tighten, my breath stumble, my skin burn under the weight of his presence. It wasn't just desire, though desire was there, sharp and undeniable. It was something deeper, something I hadn't dared to hope for any more connection. Real, raw, soul, deep connection. The warmth of his hand was not just on my skin, it was in my veins, coursing through me until I could hardly sit still. Every nerve seemed to spark awake, every part of me trembling with the reminder that I was alive. Truly alive. It was frightening, yes, but it was also the most beautiful kind of fear, the kind that makes you feel like you're standing at the edge of something vast and unstoppable. I wanted to pull away, and yet I couldn't. My loneliness had been my prison for so long, and now that I felt the bars bending, I wasn't ready to shut myself back inside. I leaned into the warmth, into the closeness, into the truth that this was not something I could fight anymore. The silence inside me had been replaced with the sound of his breath, steady and near, a rhythm that soothed and unsettled me all at once. In that moment, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel forgotten or cast aside by time. I felt seen, cherished, desired, and it shook me to my core because I had stopped believing it was possible. Loneliness tricks you into thinking that you don't need anyone, that you are safer on your own. But the truth is, loneliness is a slow death, and in that single moment of closeness, I came back to life. I remember the trembling most of all, the way my hands shook, the way my chest rose and fell too quickly, the way my lips parted without words. It wasn't weakness, it was awakening. It was my body remembering what my soul had been starving for. Warmth, tenderness, love's fire. It rushed through me so fast I could hardly catch my breath, and I didn't want to. I knew it was dangerous. I knew it was forbidden. I knew it could not be explained or understood by anyone else, but none of that mattered in the moment. What mattered was that I was alive again. What mattered was that the ache I had carried for years was finally soothed by something real, something undeniable. The emptiness was gone, shattered in the space of a single touch. And in its place was a blaze that consumed everything I thought I knew about myself, about life, about what it meant to be wanted. It was terrifying and beautiful, and I would never forget it. Because years of loneliness collapsed in that single instant of closeness, and nothing would ever be the same again. That night will never leave me. Not because of what was said, not because of promises or explanations, but because of what was felt in the silence, in the stolen moments that belonged to no one but us. The world outside was asleep, and in that stillness, everything changed. It wasn't planned. It wasn't something either of us could have written into our lives, but when it happened, it felt like every path, every decision, every moment of emptiness had been leading to that night. The air was heavy, not with words, but with everything we hadn't said. The closeness between us had been building for so long, a quiet storm waiting to break, and when it did, it wasn't reckless or careless. It was slow, trembling, almost reverent. His hand found mine, not in passing, not in accident, but with purpose. The warmth of it spread through me like fire, and in that single touch, I knew the night would not end the way it began. When his lips brushed against mine, it wasn't wild or rushed. It was soft, searching, as though he was afraid the moment might shatter if he pressed too hard. That gentleness undid me. It broke through every wall I had built, every excuse I had made, every lie I had told myself about what I did or didn't need. I melted into him, trembling, breathless, alive in a way I hadn't been for so long. Passion came, yes, but not alone. With it came tenderness, a depth I had forgotten was possible. The way his hands touched me was not only with hunger, but with care, as if he understood that I had been starving for more than desire. I had been starving for connection, for intimacy that reached past the body and into the soul, and in that night he gave me both. Every breath was shared, every movement carried weight. There were no words because none were needed. Words would have been clumsy, small against the enormity of what was happening. We spoke in silence, in touches, in the rhythm of bodies remembering what it meant to belong, even if only for that night. I felt myself unraveling, not in shame or fear, but in release. Years of loneliness, years of silence, years of pretending washed away as I gave in to what had always been pulling me toward him. It wasn't just desire that consumed me, it was recognition. It was as if our souls had been waiting for this collision, for this night, to remind us of who we were beneath the masks, beneath the rules, beneath the walls we both carried. There was nothing hurried in the way he held me, nothing careless in the way he touched me. Every moment stretched into eternity, every second carried the weight of forever. I could feel the way his heart beat against mine, fast and unsteady, matching the rhythm of my own. That unspoken harmony bound us together in a way I could never explain, not then, not now. When passion deepened, it was not something to hide from. It was not shameful. It was not wrong. It was inevitable. It was as if the universe itself had paused to make room for us, to give us that one night where nothing else mattered. Our breaths mingled, our bodies found each other with both urgency and care, and in that space there was no past, no future, only us, only now. I remember the way his hands trembled, the way he looked at me as if I were the only thing in the world that existed. I remember the way every touch burned and soothed all at once. I remember the way I felt complete, whole, alive in a way I had convinced myself I no longer needed. It was more than physical. It was a rewriting of what love meant, of what desire could be when it was born not just from want, but from something deeper, something undeniable. We didn't speak of it when the night was over. There were no declarations, no explanations, no desperate clinging to what might come next. There was only the quiet understanding that something irreversible had happened, that two worlds had collided and nothing would ever return to the way it was before. Lying there in the stillness, I knew it had been more than just passion. It had been tenderness, devotion, a raw honesty that no one else would ever understand. It was the kind of night that branded itself onto the soul, that could never be undone, and though the morning would come and life would try to carry on as if nothing had happened, I knew the truth. I knew that night had rewritten everything, because in that quiet, stolen night, passion and tenderness blurred into one, and everything changed forever. If this story touched something inside you, don't leave it here. Let it stay with you. Let it remind you that love's fire is never truly gone. Subscribe for more stories that awaken, stories that linger, stories that make you feel alive again. Like, share, and stay, because the next story may be the one that mirrors your own.